I kicked the door open with my shoulder just like I had done 100 times back when I wore the badge. The frame splintered with a sharp crack, and the warmth of the living room spilled out against the cold that still clung to my coat. Heads turned. Trevor's fork froze halfway to his mouth. His parents, Don and Cheryl, went pale as porcelain. Kara, that so-called family friend, had the decency to drop her glass of wine. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just looked at them steady as I had in every standoff across Tazewell County and said 7 words that silenced the whole Collins clan step aside. She's coming home with me. Emily's eyes filled, but she didn't move yet. She was still half frozen, still scared. My daughter stood outside moments earlier, locked out at 28 degrees, in nothing but a thin t-shirt stripped of her coat, her phone and her keys. And these people, the ones who swore family meant togetherness, were inside passing gifts around a golden turkey. The room went dead silent. Now I should tell you how it got to that point. But before I do, let me rewind the clock to the first sight that set my blood boiling, that Christmas Eve. It was 9:18 p.m. in Peoria Heights, Illinois. My old 2012 F-150 rattled a little as I parked against the curb. I'd just left the VFW where the boys and I nursed weak coffee and half-hearted jokes about our backs giving out. Snow had been falling steady all afternoon, and the thermometer in my dash read 20 warm, though the wind off the Illinois River made it bite harder. I saw her before I cut the engine. Emily, my only daughter, standing on the porch like some stray no one wanted to let in. Her arms were tight against her chest, her breath making small clouds that drifted into the night. Her hair clung to her cheeks, damp from snowflakes that had melted and refrozen. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw her without a coat. My Maggie, God rest her soul, always made sure Emily left the house warm. Even after Maggie passed, Emily still kept that habit. For her to be out there in just a t-shirt that wasn't neglect. That was deliberate. I killed the engine, stepped out, and the cold grabbed at my knees through my jeans. Emily, I called. My voice came out rough the way it does when anger sits low in your gut. She turned startled, then tried to smile, but her lips were blue. Dad, she said, voice trembling. I pulled off my flannel overshirt and threw it around her shoulders. Her fingers clutched the fabric like it was a lifeline. What the hell happened, I asked, though I already had a hunch. They said I was being dramatic, she stammered. They said I needed to cool off. Trevor took my coat, his mom took my phone, and they shut the door. I clenched my jaw. 20 years of sheriff work teaches you to stay calm, but there are moments that test even steel. Seeing your own kid treated like that is one of them. I opened the passenger side door of my truck. Get in, sweetheart. Heater's on full blast. Sit tight. She hesitated. Dad, please don't. Emily, I cut her off. Get in the truck. She slid in, teeth chattering. I adjusted the vent toward her, then turned back toward that warm yellow light spilling from the Collins window. From outside, I could hear laughter. Kara's shrill voice carried the loudest, like she belonged there more than my daughter did. My hand went to the old habit at my hip. No badge anymore, no sidearm, but the stance stayed the same. I walked up the steps, boots crunching hard against the ice, and put my hand on the doorknob. Locked, of course. They wanted her out in the cold. Fine, but they weren't expecting me. I took 2 steps back, set my shoulder, and slammed into the door. The frame split like a dry branch. Inside, a dozen eyes turned to me. Startled faces caught mid-celebration. Turkey on the table, garlands strung across the mantel, champagne glasses raised high. Trevor stood there, mouth open. He looked smaller than he ever had, stripped of the swagger he wore around town. Don and Cheryl looked like they wanted to melt into the carpet. Kara, she just smirked, but it faltered when I leveled my gaze at her. I spoke those 7 words, slow, steady, and final, and in that silence you could hear the snow hitting the window pane. Step aside, she's coming home with me. No one argued, not yet, but I could see it brewing. I could see Trevor's jaw twitch, Cheryl's lips tighten, Don's fists clench. They didn't know it yet, but the game had just changed. That's how the night started. That's how I ended up hauling my frozen daughter back into the warmth, back into safety, and back under the protection of a man who once wore the badge and still knew how to use the law. But the road from that living room to the courthouse, from silence to justice, wasn't quick. It was lined with every red flag we'd ignored, every manipulation swept under the rug, and every excuse that made Emily doubt herself. And I'll walk you through all of it step by step. I didn't sleep much that night, and it wasn't just the cold that still clung to Emily's skin. After I got her home and settled under a couple of thick quilts in my spare room, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote everything down minute by minute like I'd done in 1,000 reports before. Old habits don't die. They settle in your bones. I kept glancing down the hallway at her door. My daughter, 32 years old, sitting outside her own house on Christmas Eve in nothing but a t-shirt because her husband and his family decided humiliation counted as holiday cheer. It made my stomach turn. But before I tell you what I wrote down that night, I should explain how we got here. Because none of this came out of nowhere. Looking back, the warning signs were lit up in neon. I just wanted to believe she'd married a man who'd eventually grow up. My name's Walt Haynes, 68 years old, retired sheriff of Tazewell County. I live in a modest bungalow in East Peoria, half a mile from the VFW Hall, where I drink coffee every morning at 6. My wife Maggie passed 3 years ago from lung cancer. We built this place together. After she was gone, it was just me, my routines and the memories I kept close. Her garden gloves still hanging in the garage, her recipes tucked in the kitchen drawer. Emily was our only child. Bright kid, quiet but determined. She met Trevor Collins at Illinois Central College. He had the salesman's smile even back then, the kind of guy who slapped you on the back like he'd known you all his life. He promised her the world. I remember the quick wedding at the Methodist church downtown. Maggie's hands shaking from chemo, but her face still lit up seeing Emily in white. I wanted to believe Trevor's charm covered substance. Turns out charm was all he had. The first cracks showed up early. He'd joke about Emily's friends saying they were bad influences. He made sure she shared her location on her phone at all times, said it was for safety. He'd misplace her keys, then turn up holding them, grinning like it was some cute routine. I saw the way she'd laugh it off, but her eyes flickered with something else. Then came the holidays. Thanksgiving year before last. Emily had baked one of Maggie's old pumpkin pies her way of keeping her mom close. She told me later that Trevor refused to bring it to his parents' dinner. Said, "We don't need your dad's traditions here. We've got our own." Emily cried in the car and ate half that pie by herself when she got home. I started keeping notes the way I did when I was sheriff. Dates, times, words. I didn't tell her, but I wrote them down because I knew where patterns lead. October 17th sticks with me. It was late, almost midnight. My neighbor Patty Ruiz, a nurse who works night shifts, told me later she'd come home to see Emily sitting on the porch crying into her sleeves. Patty went to check, but Emily waved her off, embarrassed. Patty told me the time, exactly 11:40 p.m. I logged it. I'd ask Emily now and then, "You good kiddo?" She'd smile, say she was fine, say Trevor just had a temper, but he cooled off quick. I wanted to believe her. Maybe I needed to. Losing Maggie had left me raw, and I didn't want to think my daughter had walked into a different kind of slow death. But patience can be a coward's excuse. That's something I've had to admit to myself. The Sunday before Christmas, Pastor Jim gave a sermon about patience, how it was a virtue, how God's timing isn't ours. Folks nodded along. I sat in the pew thinking, sure, but patience doesn't freeze your daughter on a porch. Sometimes patience just lets bullies get comfortable. So when the forecast said temps would drop into the 20s, with wind chill in the teens, I made my decision. If I didn't see Emily that night, I'd swing by on Christmas Eve unannounced. Sheriff instincts, father instincts. Call it whatever you want, but I wasn't about to let another holiday slip into silence. That's what brought me to her doorstep at 9:18 p.m., finding her shaking in the dark while Trevor carved turkey and Kara poured champagne inside. Back at my table, pen scratching across paper, I wrote the whole thing out. The minute I parked, the way she clutched my flannel, the exact words she told me, they said I was being dramatic. I logged the time I put her in the truck, 9:26 p.m., and the text Trevor sent later, "Grow up and come back in." I stared at that message on her phone for a long time. I thought about the years Maggie and I spent teaching Emily to stand tall, to trust her worth. And here was this man trying to grind it down into dust. I looked at the clock, past midnight by then. I put the pen down, closed the pad, and poured myself a finger of Old Forester. I sat in silence the way you do when you know a storm's coming, but you're glad finally that it is. Because I wasn't a sheriff anymore, but I still knew how to build a case. And come morning, that's exactly what I do. I woke up before dawn, same as always. Years on the force hardwire you to rise early, whether you want to or not. The house was quiet except for the hum of the furnace kicking on and the faint whistle of the wind through the eaves. Emily was still asleep in the spare room. I cracked the door enough to see her curled under the quilts, my old watch cap pulled low over her ears. She looked small, younger than she had in years. It cut me deep seeing her like that. I shuffled to the kitchen, started the percolator, and laid out my yellow pad from the night before. The notes were there in my messy block, handwriting times, words, actions. It looked like one of my old case logs. And maybe that's what it was now, a case. By 6:30 a.m., the sun hadn't cracked the horizon, but I knew I needed to move fast. You don't let abuse breathe. It festers if you give it room. I filled a thermos, grabbed my truck keys, and left Emily a note on the counter. Went to get groceries. Be back quick. Rest. At the gas station, I topped off the tank, bought her some hot cocoa, and flipped through the newspaper. Headline was about a credit union merger. The rest was ads for Christmas sales. Meanwhile, my daughter was dealing with a man who thought it was funny to take her coat and shove her outside. I drove straight to OSF St. Francis Medical Center, told the nurse at urgent care what happened, and got Emily checked in without fuss. Mild hypothermia, the doctor said. Nothing permanent, thank God. But it was in writing now, with a date and time stamped at the top of the chart. Evidence. Back in the truck, I called an old colleague, Lieutenant Jack Romano, over at Morton PD. Jack, it's Walt, I said, keeping my voice even. I've got a situation with Emily. I'm not asking for favors. Just log this domestic incident welfare check requested. I'll handle the rest. Jack sighed. Walt, you know I'll do it by the book. That's all I'm asking, I replied. The thing about being sheriff for so many years is you learn not to skip steps. Paper first, talk later. Paper keeps things clean. By mid-morning, Emily was sipping cocoa in the passenger seat, color back in her cheeks. She kept saying, Dad, I don't want to ruin his life. I gripped the wheel tighter. Sweetheart, he already lit the fuse. We're just making sure it doesn't burn you down. We stopped at Walmart on Allen Road. I picked up a prepaid track phone so Trevor couldn't harass her anymore, and a tote of essentials from Hy-Vee soap toothpaste, enough groceries to last the week. At the credit union, I deposited some cash into her account just to give her breathing room. When we pulled back into my driveway, my neighbor Patty Ruiz was out front scraping her windshield. She waved us over. Emily, honey, you okay? Emily forced a smile. Yeah, Patty, thanks. Patty looked at me, then back at Emily. I heard you crying out there in October. I didn't want to push, but you don't have to live like that. Emily's face flushed. You heard. Patty nodded gently. Nurses notice things. I filed that in my head. Witness testimony, credible, time-stamped. Inside the house, I sat Emily down with a sandwich and opened my manila folder. Inside went the medical note, a printout of the police report number, Jack logged screenshots of Trevor's text, and now Patty's statement. This isn't about drama, I told her. It's about facts. Judges like facts. Emily chewed slowly, eyes darting between me and the folder. What if it gets worse after this? I leaned forward. Then we follow through. Emergency order of protection, court hearing. If he wants to fight, he can do it under oath. Not in the dark with you freezing on a porch. She swallowed hard, but she nodded. That evening, while the Collins family posted their Christmas photos on Facebook, smiles wide, tree glowing, I typed up a timeline. Every incident I'd logged, every red flag ignored. Dates, times, words, witnesses. Around 9, my phone buzzed. It was Trevor. His message, you're making this into something it isn't. Family matters stay in the family. I stared at that text, then looked over at Emily sitting on the couch wrapped in Maggie's old quilt. No, I muttered. Family doesn't do that. I took a screenshot, slid it into the folder, and zipped it shut. The storm had started, and I wasn't about to let it pass quietly. Christmas morning, the sky over East Peoria was pale gray, the kind of color that makes the whole world look like it's holding its breath. I was up early, frying sausage and whisking gravy, while biscuits browned in the oven. Emily wandered in around 7 hair messy Maggie's quilt still draped around her shoulders. She smiled faintly at the smell. Biscuits and gravy. On Christmas, she asked, her voice rough with sleep. Tradition, I said, sliding a plate her way. Some traditions are worth keeping. She sat down, and for the first time in a long time, she ate like she was actually hungry. Still her phone? Well, Trevor's old phone kept buzzing on the counter. voicemails from Cheryl Facebook, notifications lighting up. I didn't need to hear them to know what they said. By mid-morning, I played one of the messages on speaker so Emily could hear for herself. Cheryl's voice was sharp as a tack. "Emily, honey, this is a family matter. Don't drag cops into it. We'll sort it out when you're calmer." Emily pushed her plate away. "She makes it sound like I'm the crazy one." "That's the point," I said flatly. "Control always spins the story." Sure enough, when I opened Facebook later there, it was a post from Don Collins. A picture of their perfectly set table, Trevor and Kara both in the frame, smiles plastered on their faces. Caption, "So blessed. Family means everything." And right under it, a vague dig. Some folks just don't understand holiday spirit. I shut the laptop, let them talk. Paper talks louder. We drove into town after lunch. First stop, Walmart again, this time for a lockbox. Emily's essentials would stay secure under my roof. Next, Hy-Vee for a second tote of groceries. I slid cash into her CEFCU debit card at the credit union, enough to carry her a while. At the gas pump, I caught her staring out the window. "I don't want to blow up his life, Dad," she said. I leaned against the truck. "You're not blowing it up. He is. We're just making sure he doesn't take you with him." Back home, Patty Ruiz came by. She knocked gently, holding a tray of tamales wrapped in foil. "Merry Christmas," she said softly. Then she turned serious. "Emily, I'll swear to it. I saw you out there crying that night in October. 11:40. I wrote it in my nurse's log because I knew I'd forget the time otherwise." Emily blinked back tears. "You'd testify?" Patty nodded. "Nobody deserves that, not in this cold." I thanked her, slid the tamale tray onto the counter, and added her written note to my folder. Dates, times, witnesses, it was stacking up. That evening, as the snow came down harder, I called my old deputy, Marty Jensen. He still worked with the sheriff's office. "Marty," I said, "need a standby when we serve papers tomorrow." He didn't hesitate. "Name the time, Walt. I'll be there." Emily overheard, her face tense. "Papers." I met her eyes. "Emergency order of protection. We'll file first thing after Christmas. Temporary at first, then a full hearing." She bit her lip. "What if the judge doesn't believe me?" I tapped the manila folder. "We've got your testimony, Patty's medical note from OSF, screenshots, the police report number, and that voicemail. Judges don't go off hunches, they go off proof, and we've got plenty." The next voicemail came around 8 p.m. Chad Collins, Trevor's cousin, fancy law degree and all. His message was slick, practiced. This was clearly a misunderstanding. "Let's not escalate. Best for everyone if we resolve this amicably." Emily shook her head. "Amicably, like nothing happened." I smiled thin. "Amicably means don't make us look bad. Paper makes them look bad. That's why they're worried." Before bed, I pulled the calendar off the fridge. December 26th, circled in pencil, 8:30 a.m. Courtroom 203. I wrote it bold so Emily could see it. "We show up on time with our shoes shined," I told her. Snow piled high on the porch by then. I stood at the window, watching it bury the steps where she'd been left shaking the night before. My chest tightened, but at the same time a strange calm set in. I'd spent years as sheriff knowing when a case was ready to present. This one was ironclad. And tomorrow the Collins family would learn what it felt like when truth walked through the door. By late afternoon on Christmas Day, the snow had turned to a fine, glittering powder that made the street lamps look like they were wearing halos. Emily sat at my dining table with a mug between her hands, turning it slowly like she could warm the whole day with it. I checked the clock, 5:42 p.m., and called Marty. "Deputy Jensen," he answered, that old grin in his voice. "Marty, it's Walt. We're doing a civil standby at the Collins place. She needs her coat, her purse, and whatever basics she can grab in 5 minutes. No arguments. You free at 6:15. "Copy that. I'll meet you curbside." I hung up and looked at Emily. "You ready?" She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded, small but steady. "Yeah." We rolled down Prospect toward Peoria Heights as the sky went violet. I felt that familiar pre-incident quiet settle in, breathing slow eyes, scanning porches, listening for the wrong kind of music. Not the job anymore, but it lives in you. At 6:12 p.m., we turned onto their street. The Collins house glowed like a catalog photo icicle. Lights, a big red ball on the door silhouettes moving behind the curtains. I could hear Bing Crosby bleeding through the glass. "I'll be home for Christmas," the kind of line that makes a liar out of a house. Marty's County Tahoe idled at the curb. He stepped out, shook my hand, then tipped his chin to Emily. "Ma'am, thanks for coming," she said, voice tight. "Standard standby," he said easily. "No one needs to be a hero. We're in, we're out." We approached the porch together, me a step behind Emily, Marty to her right. Before she could knock, the door popped open. Don Collins stood there, a whiskey glow in his cheeks. Behind him, I saw Cheryl at the buffet, and farther in, Trevor laughing too loudly with a couple from church. Kara hovered at his elbow like she'd grown there. Don tried to fill the doorway. "This isn't a good time." Marty kept his tone neutral. "Evening, sir. Deputy Jensen with the sheriff's office. We're here for a civil standby so Mrs. Collins can retrieve essential items. 5 minutes should do it." Cheryl appeared, smile tight as string. "In front of our guests, surely this can wait." Marty shifted his boots a quarter inch enough to say no, without raising a syllable. 5 minutes, he repeated. "We'll keep it quiet." Trevor finally turned. For a heartbeat, his face actually registered surprise. Then he did that salesman thing, lifting his chin like he was about to offer us a great deal. "Emily," he said, as if he hadn't left her on a porch the night before, "you're being dramatic again. We could have talked if you hadn't." "Stop," I said, just like I did in interview rooms when the suspect started rehearsing. Cheryl's jaw clicked. "Well, we don't need your authority voice here." Marty held up a hand. "Folks, let's keep it simple." He looked at Emily. "What do you need?" "My coat, my purse." "The little lockbox in the closet," Emily said, finding her breath. "And my phone." Cheryl flinched at that last part. Kara folded her arms. Trevor opened his mouth, then decided against whatever lie was loading. "Coat closet," Emily said, pointing past Don's shoulder. Don didn't move. If you've served papers or warrants long enough, you recognize that silly little tug-of-war men trying to control a doorway, like it's proof they still own something. I shifted my weight, and he caught my eyes. Whatever he saw there made him step aside. Emily went straight to the hall closet and pulled out her winter coat. She slid her arms in, drew a breath, and her shoulders settled an inch lower. Human beings need warmth. It's not a metaphor. Marty watched the room without staring the way good deputies do. "Purse," Emily said, scanning the side table. "Cheryl had it last." Cheryl bristled. "I safeguarded it because she was upset." "Where is it?" Marty asked, mild as weather. Cheryl hesitated, then disappeared into the den and reappeared with the purse. "Nothing's missing," she announced, but she wouldn't meet Emily's eyes. "Phone," Emily said, turning toward Kara. Kara's laugh was small and sharp. "Maybe you put it somewhere silly." Marty glanced at me. I nodded. He stepped forward, voice still friendly. "Ma'am, if you have it, I'm going to need you to hand it over. It belongs to her." Kara's smirk faltered. She patted her cardigan pockets, then produced the phone and passed it pinched between two fingers, like it might stain. "Thank you," Marty said. He handed it to Emily. "Check your messages later, not now." From the dining room, conversation had slowed to a hush. Their guest neighbors, a couple from Trevor's dealership, pretended to drink while they listened. That was the thing about doing this with the lights on. Truth has better reach than gossip. "Lockbox?" I asked. "In the bedroom closet," Emily said, then looked at Marty. "May I?" "Let's keep to common areas tonight," Marty said, gentle but firm. "We'll schedule a property retrieval for anything beyond essentials. That way, no one argues about what's whose." Trevor tried a new tack. "This is ridiculous. We had a misunderstanding." She stormed out. Marty didn't take the bait. "Sir, she left without her coat, phone, or keys in 28 degrees? That's not what we call storming out." A couple by the tree exchanged a look. You could feel the air shifting, the narrative slipping out of Trevor's hands like a wet fish. I took my phone from my coat pocket. "Marty," I said quietly, "you still have that ring clip?" He understood before I finished. "Yep." He opened the video Patty had shared, time-stamped October 17th, 11:40 p.m., and hit play. The audio wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Through the porch mic, you could hear Emily say, "Please, Trevor, it's cold." Then a woman's voice, Kara's unmistakable, laughing, "Let her cool off." Then someone else, "Take her keys." Marty didn't hold it up like a trophy. He just let the sound carry. The room absorbed it. Don's glass paused halfway to his mouth. Cheryl's eyes darted. A woman near the mantel turned scarlet and stared at her shoes. The couple from the dealership edged toward the foyer. Trevor's face lost its shape for a second. Then he did what cornered men do. He got loud. That's out of context. Context, I said, keeping my voice even, is 28 degrees. Context is a medical note from OSF with today's date. Context is a report number with Morton PD. Cheryl took a step toward Emily, palms up like she could smooth it all down. Honey, you know we love you. Love doesn't take your coat, Emily said, and there it was, her voice. Clear, not shaking. We didn't drag it out. Marty checked his watch. Time's up. Emily zipped her coat, tucked her purse under her arm, and slid the phone into her pocket. She looked around the room once at the people who'd smiled while she froze, and then she turned and walked out. On the porch, the cold hit hard, clean, and honest. Emily exhaled, watched her breath lift, then looked at me. Thank you. Paper tomorrow, I said. We do this the right way. On the sidewalk, a guest hurried past, head down, pretending not to see. From inside, the music had stopped. The only sound was the tick of their furnace and the squeak of boots on snow. Marty locked eyes with me across the hood of his Tahoe. I'll be at the courthouse at 8, he said. If you want a friendly face. Appreciate it, I said. We drove home, slow tires crunching on the powder. At a red light, Emily turned her phone over in her hands. He's going to say I made it all up, she murmured. Let him, I said. Tomorrow he can say it under oath. Back at the house, I hung her coat on the peg by the door and set the lockbox on the table. I wrote the date on a fresh tab, 12/25, civil standby, items retrieved, witness present. I slid the ring clip reference under it, the OSF note behind that, the police number card on top. The folder closed with a satisfying little thump. At 9:07 p.m., snow still falling, I put the coffee on for the morning and shined my shoes. It sounds silly, but it centers you. You show up on time with your shoes shined and the truth in order. Juries notice, and so do judges. Emily paused in the hallway. Dad. Yeah, kiddo. She touched the new lock on my front door almost absently, then let her hand drop. I don't feel crazy anymore. You never were, I said. You were cold. There's a difference. She smiled small real and headed to the spare room. I sat down at the table one last time and wrote a single line across the top of the pad. Deck 26, 8:30 a.m. courtroom, 203 under oath. The house was quiet except for the furnace and the faint hiss of snow. Tomorrow would be public, and for once that would be a mercy. The next morning the courthouse smelled like wet boots and burned coffee. We hit the doors at 7:58 a.m., the security line already snaking past the metal detector. Emily walked beside me in her navy peacoat, hair pulled back, a plain scarf Maggie knitted years ago, looped twice around her neck. She kept tucking a loose end into the collar like she needed something to do with her hands. I carried the manila folder in a small spiral notebook, the same kind I'd used on patrol when the bigger pad got clumsy. Breathe, I said, not looking at her. In on 4, out on 6. She matched my cadence. The deputy at the scanner nodded at me with the faint recognition old courthouse rats give each other. We emptied our pockets, stepped through, collected our things. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere an elevator dinged. A guy in a suit was arguing into his AirPods about a continuance. Courtroom 203 was smaller than I remembered. Same seal above the bench, same clock that ran 2 minutes fast. Judge Dennison took the bench at 8:30 on the dot, black robe, gray haircut, short eyes that said she'd seen worse and didn't like any of it. Deputy Marty slid in the back row. He gave us the smallest nod. Case on emergency order of protection, the clerk called. Haynes Collins. We stood. Emily's knees didn't shake, but I could see the effort it took to keep them still. Trevor and his cousin Chad hustled in from the hallway, snow on their shoulders, like they'd run through a flurry. Trevor wouldn't look at Emily. Chad did, then arranged his face into concerned professionalism. Judge Dennison glanced at the file. Petitioner present, respondent present with counsel. We're here on a request for an emergency order of protection. Petitioner, you'll be sworn. Emily raised her right hand. The oath sounded older than the building. Ms. Collins, the judge said, voice steady. This is your opportunity to tell me what happened. Use dates and times where you can. If you don't know exactly, say so. Emily swallowed. Yes, Your Honor. She started with Christmas Eve, 9:18 p.m., porch light on temperature 28. She told the judge about the thin t-shirt, the coat taking the phone, and keys withheld the door closing, while the house laughed and passed gifts. She didn't dramatize. She didn't name call. She said they said I was being dramatic. She said Kara laughed and said I should cool off. She said I stood there until my dad arrived. Where was your husband, the judge asked. Inside, Emily said, with his parents Don and Cheryl Collins and Kara Benton. Do you have medical documentation? Yes, I said, stepping forward when the judge nodded. OSF St. Francis Urgent Care, dated December 25th. Mild hypothermia noted. Photos taken the night of timestamps here. I slid the copies to the clerk. My hands were steady in a way I hadn't felt in years. Paper is a metronome for the truth. Chad stood when the judge looked his way. Your Honor, we don't dispute that there was tension last evening, but my client asserts Ms. Collins left of her own accord after an argument. No one took anything. In fact, items were safeguarded for her. Judge Dennison held up a hand. You'll have your turn. I called Patty next. She took the stand with that nurse calm palms flat on her thighs. Patricia Ruiz, she said. I live across from Ms. Collins. She never once looked at Trevor. Miss Ruiz, I said, did you witness any prior incidents? October 17th, she said, 11:40 p.m. I remember because I logged my shift change. Ms. Collins sat on the porch crying. I asked if she needed help. She waved me off. It was cold. Chad half rose. Relevance, Your Honor. It goes to pattern, the judge said. Overruled. When it was my turn, I kept it short. Walt Haynes, retired sheriff. I arrived at 9:18 p.m. on Christmas Eve. I found my daughter outside in a t-shirt. I placed her in my truck to warm up. I returned to the door, found it locked, and you forced entry, Chad cut in, trying to catch a thread. And I shouldered the door to enter a house where my daughter lived. I finished looking at the judge. I told them she was leaving with me. There was no physical confrontation. Later, I called Morton PD to log a welfare check and domestic incident. I did not request special treatment. Here's the report number. Do you have any recordings, Judge Dennison asked. Your Honor, Marty said from the back, standing when she nodded. Deputy Jensen, Tazewell County. I have a Ring doorbell clip provided by a neighbor. Audio isn't perfect. Timestamp October 17th, 23:40 hours. The clerk set up the little rolling TV they use for evidence. The grainy video filled the screen porch light, haloing Snow Emily's hunched shoulders. Her voice was soft but clear. Please, Trevor, it's cold. Then a woman's voice. Let her cool off. Then a male voice, take her keys. The clip ended on the soft click of a door. The room breathed in and didn't breathe out for a beat. Chad smoothed his tie, out of context. Mr. Collins, Judge Dennison said, turning to Trevor, who took your wife's coat on Christmas Eve. Trevor blinked. You could see him running options, the old salesman software glitching. Wishy there was shouting. Things get misplaced. Who had her phone? Silence stretched. He glanced at Chad. It was kept safe. By whom? He swallowed. My mother. And her keys, the judge asked. He stared at the table. I did. The judge wrote something down, slow and deliberate, the way you write when you want the ink to sink all the way through the page. Chad tried one last angle. Your Honor, my client loves his wife. This is a misunderstanding in a marriage. Surely a mutual no-contact order is more. Judge Dennison's look could have flattened a nail. Counselor, the Illinois Domestic Violence Act exists for precisely this. Cooling off. Someone, by taking their property and excluding them from their home in winter, is not a misunderstanding. It's coercive control. She turned to Emily. Ms. Collins, do you want exclusive possession of the residence pending hearing? Emily's voice didn't waver. Yes, Your Honor. Any firearms in the home, the judge asked. No, Emily said. Just kitchen knives. Mr. Collins, Judge Dennison said you are ordered to stay away from Ms. Collins, her residence, and her workplace. No contact, no calls, texts, emails, or third-party messages. You will have a 20-minute civil standby with the sheriff's office to retrieve personal clothing and tools. No other property until further order. Exclusive possession of the marital residence is granted to Ms. Collins. Hearing on a plenary order is set for January 6th at 9 a.m. The gavel didn't bang, she didn't need it. The clerk handed us certified copies still warm from the printer. Paper has a kind of heat to it when it's fresh. You learn to feel it. Emily exhaled like she'd been underwater. I squeezed her hand once. Behind us, someone in the gallery murmured, good, the words soft as a prayer. Trevor sat down hard, the sort of sit that comes when a man's story stops working in public. As we gathered our things, the judge looked over her glasses at Emily. If anyone attempts to contact you in violation, call immediately. Don't negotiate. Yes, Your Honor, Emily said. In the hall, Marty clapped me on the shoulder. Clean, he said. Textbook. Chad hustled Trevor away with the promise of appeals and narratives. Folks like that always want another room where they think the lights are kinder. but they'd had their public moment, and it had gone the way truth goes when it has paper and witnesses. By 10:12 a.m., we were back on the sidewalk. The snow had stopped, leaving everything bright and honest. Emily tilted her face into the thin sun eyes closed. "I can breathe," she said. "You can go home," I answered. We walked to the truck without hurrying. For once, time was on our side. Deputy Jensen met us at the curb just after lunch. The clouds had moved on and left a pale winter sun, the sort that looks warm from a window and lies the second you step outside. Emily stood straight in her pea-coat order of protection, folded in her purse like a passport. We walked up to her house without hurry. It felt different now, not a battlefield, just a place where rules would be followed. Trevor was already on the porch, arms folded tight, eyes ringed like he hadn't slept. He didn't look at Emily. He looked past her like there might be a camera, like he could perform his way back to the old story. Cheryl and Don flanked him, smaller than they'd been a few days before. People shrink when they can't control the door. Marty kept its simple voice calm enough to land a plane. Civil standby. 20 minutes to retrieve clothing and tools. No documents, no electronics beyond a personal phone. Not in the petitioner's account, no valuables that could be disputed. You understand? Trevor's jaw worked. I understand. Good, Marty said. He checked the time on his watch. Now. Trevor went inside like a man walking into a room he no longer owned. Don and Cheryl stayed on the porch, clutching their coats like armor. Cheryl tried to smile at Emily, the kind women use when a cake falls, and they pretend they meant it that way. We can sit down later and talk calmly, she said. Emily met her eyes. There's nothing to talk about. I changed the conversation the old-fashioned way. I carried a new Schlage deadbolt up the steps. We'll be replacing the locks, I said, not for permission. Cheryl blinked. So soon. Exclusive possession, I said, tapping the paper. Soon is the schedule. Inside the house looked smaller. I noticed the details cops always notice: the ring of faint watermarks under a sweating glass, a bump in the rug where someone kicked the corner and never fixed it, a lip of ice forming on the inside of a drafty window. Houses tell on their owners if you listen. Trevor tossed shirts into a trash bag, then a handful of socks, then grabbed the wrong cordless drill from a shelf. That's mine, he snapped at nobody, shaking at once for emphasis. Leave it, Marty said. You can inventory at the full retrieval later. Kara wasn't there. Sometimes even the boldest tucktail when the lights come on. At 16 minutes, Marty said time. He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. Trevor tied the bag, cinched his jaw, and brushed past us. On the porch he stopped, looked at Emily for the first time, and reached for some line that might sting. He couldn't find one. It was like trying to start an engine that would never turn over again. He took the steps slow. Don followed with his hands jammed in his pockets. Cheryl brushed Emily's sleeve as she passed. We love you, she whispered. Love is warm, Emily said. This wasn't. When their car pulled away, I set the toolbox on the floor by the front door, popped the old lock, and swapped it for the new deadbolt. Emily stood with her hands in her coat pockets, watching like it was surgery. The last screw set the bolt slid clean into the strike plate, and I handed her the key. She turned it, heard the click, and everything in her shoulders changed. We walked the rooms together. In the kitchen, I set the kettle on and tested the GFCI outlet that had always been touchy. In the hall, I marked the stud locations with a pencil dot for where she'd said she wanted to hang pictures. In the bedroom, she opened a window 2 inches, just because she could then closed it again, smiling at nothing. The doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a rag and opened it to find Deacon Ron, hat in his hands, steam curling from his breath. He didn't step in. He just offered a prayer in the doorway, something short and plain about protection and new seasons, then backed away like you do when you know a house needs quiet more than blessings. Half an hour later, my VFW buddy Earl came by with 2 space heaters and 0 commentary. He set them down, looked at me, looked at Emily, and said, "Got extra if you need 'em," which is Midwestern for "I love you both, but I'll keep it man-shaped." By mid-afternoon, the house sounded like a house should: the hum of the furnace kettle singing light, a neighbor's snowblower far off, a kid testing a sled on a little hill and laughing when it didn't work. We ate Patty's tamales at the kitchen table, with our coats off, steam fogging the window for the first time all week. Emily took a second and then a third and said, "I didn't know I could be this hungry." "You're warming up," I said. "Everything works better then." When the sun started down, the rooms went the color of old honey. We stepped outside with mugs and walked the sidewalk slow. The neighborhood had that between holidays feel trash cans, half full of wrapping paper, someone's extension cord still snaking across the yard from an inflatable Santa, a wreath crooked on a door where a kid must have bumped it good. Emily hooked her arm through mine the way she did when she was little. I kept thinking it was my fault for not managing him better, she said quietly. If I said the right thing, if I made the right dinner, if I agreed to the right schedule. I watched our breath drift. Men like that always sell you the idea that you're the thermostat. Their weather is their own. You can't stop a front from rolling in, but you can choose the house you stand in when it does. She nodded and we turned back. The porch light came on by timer, a soft circle of ordinary. Inside, I wrote key numbers and the lock model in my little notebook and slid a copy of the new key into an envelope labeled for Patty in case of emergency. Old habits build rails for new days to run on. Emily spread a throw blanket across the couch that Maggie used to love and adjusted it a couple times until it fell right. We sat a while without talking. Then she said Mom would have liked today. She would have made soup and told stories about winters in '79 until you forgot you were cold, I said. She would have baked bread too. The house would smell like it was wearing a sweater. We both laughed at that and the laugh didn't hitch. Before I left, I checked the windows, the back door, the basement light, the smoke detector. Not because she needed me to, but because I needed to. On the threshold, I turned to her. The words I'd said 2 nights ago at the broken door came back with their edges smoothed. Step aside, I murmured softer now. She's coming home with me. I point at her living room. Home means here. Warm, quiet yours. She hugged me hard. I know, she said into my coat. I feel it. Out on the walk, a man waved from across the street and said, "Heard good news," and then left it there. That's how a neighborhood fixes a breach 1 knot at a time. I climbed into the F-150 and let the heater spool up. Before I put it in drive, I'll tell you what I told myself when I took off the badge. Winter isn't just weather. Some folks make rooms winter. Some make them spring. If you're my age and you see someone you love being chilled on purpose, don't wait for a warmer forecast. Write the time. Keep the proof. Show up. And if this story gives you a spine-stiffening kind of warmth, share it with someone who needs it. Leave a note if you want about where you're listening from. And if you'd like more plain-spoken real-life stories like this, stick around. We'll keep the coffee hot and the lights on.